So my name is Anne-Marie Glover. I'm really pleased to be involved in this session today. And huge thanks to our four board members who've agreed to join us today. I think we've got Jonathan Goren with us, Anne Harris, Helen Phillips, and I hope Mark is either here or joining us very shortly. These are incredibly...
He's just arrived, Anne-Marie.
Wonderful. Welcome. Welcome to all of you. And it's great to have so many of you joining this session too. As Edmina said, this is your chance to meet key members of the Social Work England board, hear a bit about them and their role and the work that they do for social work and within Social Work England. As Edmina said, there's your chance to ask questions through the chat function, so please do put those in there and we'll respond to as many of those as we can. We've had some questions sent in advance too, so we're probably going to start with those if that's okay. So we've got just under, I think now, an hour together in this session. So before we go to the questions, I'd like to invite each of our board members to do three things: to introduce yourself, to tell us a little bit about why you decided to join the Social Work England board, and say a little bit of what you've learned in this role. And we'll allow just under 5 minutes to each of you for this. It would be great to hear that. I just thought maybe we'd just go in alphabetical order by family name. So if it's okay, Jonathan, for us to start with you, then can we start with you?
That's fine. Thank you, Anne-Marie, and thanks for inviting me to be here today. I hope everyone's enjoyed the sessions that they've attended and looking forward to the ones that have yet to come. I'm Jonathan Goren. A bit about me. I'm a regulator by background. I work for professional bodies, and alongside my role at Social Work England, I'm also a director of policy of the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors and a trustee of the Science Council. My hobbies and interests are fairly limited, but I do things outside of regulation, which is a relief to my partner and most of the people I know. I enjoy climbing, playing tennis, and traveling around the world where I can. And goodness knows, hopefully that'll happen again soon. Why I decided to join the board. So I actually started my journey with Social Work England probably a little time before everybody else. So some of you on the call might remember the advisory board that was set up before Social Work England was established, and I was actually involved in that as sort of a regulatory expert. And my role there was looking at how to advise on the legislation, how to make Social Work England different to the other regulators, and really thinking about what we wanted from a regulator that was going to be sustainable and forward-looking. And I got really interested in that. So, I mean, my background is in setting up and establishing new regulators, both in the UK and around the world, and developing existing regulators. So this really aligned with sort of what I do for a role, in my sort of quite a niche role that is. But also, you know, there was a reflection by me that actually, you know, social work had gone to many different regulators over the last few years, and there was a real need to make sure that Social Work England was a success, and I really felt I could help achieve that and make that happen. And it's been really rewarding actually seeing Social Work England go from a sort of a glint in a statute book through to being the sort of successful operation that I think it is today. And I'm sure the board members reflect on that accordingly. Explain what I've learned from the role. So, I mean, I've been amazed at sort of the breadth and depth of social work, actually. That's something that's really been interesting to me. And one of the things I've really enjoyed doing, I know this isn't quite the question, Anne-Marie, so apologies, but one of the things I've really enjoyed doing is meeting future social workers, going with the regional engagement leads, which I think are absolutely fantastic for Social Work England, and getting to meet students, social workers, but you know, everybody involved and employers. And I think that's been a really interesting opportunity for me to actually understand more about social work. I know a fair bit about regulation, but that's why I'm on the board. But actually understanding the nature and breadth of social work has been fascinating for me. So thanks very much for having me here today. I look forward to answering any questions.
Thanks so much, Jonathan, for that. And as a social work academic myself, I'm delighted to hear, amongst the many things you've enjoyed in the role, but meeting the students and again at the start of their journey into the profession. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. Anne, if you're okay to go next, that would be great.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm Anne. I'm the newbie on the board, so I've not been on the board as long as other colleagues here. And I joined just before Social Work England went live in December 2019. and then we went into lockdown not long after that. So I've not even met very many of my board colleagues very often, if I'm honest. I did work for another regulator, and I work very closely with the Financial Conduct Authority in another role that I've got. But why did I decide to apply for this job? Well, any organisation that's just starting out is attractive for a non-executive director, because you feel as though you can help shape an organisation into what it needs to be. So that's always an attraction. But the best and most effective boards are made up from people who bring a range of skills. And at the time that I applied for this vacancy, Social Work England were looking for a chair of their Audit, Risk and Assurance Committee, which I'm sure sounds dreadfully boring to most people. But it's my background. So I was in finance and major programmes in a big government department. So I'm public sector through and through. So because I could bring those skills to Social Work England and was attracted to the newness of the organisation, and the fact that we had the government backing to set up a regulator just for social workers, I just thought that was such a good mission to have. And what have I learned? So I obviously am not a social worker, and I haven't had much to do with anybody in social work. And I am teamed with one of your regional engagement leads, who is incredibly patient with me and keeps telling me things. But what I've discovered so far is social workers have an incredibly hard job, a seriously hard job, and it's such an important profession that you must all be really proud of what you do, to be honest. You're very rarely invited into a happy situation. It's usually a problem, and it's usually with some of the most vulnerable people in society. That makes your job hard from day one. You're expected to know everything in the local community. I've worked out that, everybody that you visit in their homes or help in other ways expects you to know everything, and point them in the right direction. And so your journey from qualification to being very experienced can be a long one, because you've just got so much to learn. So quite frankly, I am in awe of what I've learned so far, and I know I've got a lot more to learn. So I'm really grateful to be here today. Thank you for the opportunity, and I look forward to continuing working with my regional engagement lead. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anne. And I think you made some important points there. It's incredibly difficult, isn't it, joining an organisation, doing social work during a pandemic. And I think I'm sure there are many social workers here today, and I think for them to be acknowledged and appreciated in that way is really important. And I think the bit about, you bring a particular skill, whether that's on a board or whether that's in a team, the mix of skills is really important. And obviously that's part of the role that you all do. Thank you so much for that, Anne. Mark, I think you're with us. Are you okay to go next, please?
Yes, of course. Thank you, Anne-Marie. It's a real pleasure to be here and to meet everybody. I'm Mark. I'm one of the non-executive directors on the board. I'm from Singapore originally, although I settled in the UK in the 90s. So it must be about 25 years ago now, as I fell in love with the country. And one of the reasons I fell in love with the country is the incredible social infrastructure that we've got. It is very special, and I can say that coming from the other side of the world. I've had a career in two halves. My first career was in IT and telecommunications. So I'm actually a digital technologist by profession, and it was one of the reasons why I applied for the role, because the chair at the time was looking to complement the board with somebody with a digital background, which is quite rare actually at board level, but it's becoming increasingly desirable. And I'm very pleased to have been able to help, particularly in the first year, the team to refine its plans to go to launch, as everything is so heavily digitized now, and the pandemic has furthermore shone a spotlight on that. That was the first half of my career. I currently devote myself to public service. I am a chair of 2 mental health trusts in London. And that's in part the other reason why I joined Social Work England. The 2 trusts that I chair are large employers of social workers ourselves. And of course, we work incredibly closely with social workers. And I have a huge and growing admiration for everybody in the profession, and are very keen to see how the NHS in particular can work more closely with the social worker profession. And like Anne, I also joined because it's such a rare opportunity to be able to join the board of a new regulator. These things don't happen every year. In fact, I think it's I remember at the time thinking it's a once in a decade opportunity. And there's a tremendous energy and drive at the start of all organizations, and a real opportunity to listen to everybody and to get things right. That's, I suppose, Anne-Marie, my first learning was listening to the profession in the last 2 years. And what's really, really struck me is the tremendously great work that everybody in the profession does. And we hear so many cases a year, and there's so many success stories, but I feel almost we don't shout about it enough. And what the public tend to hear about are the occasions where we do get things wrong, which does happen, but that does tend to get amplified, and it sort of drowns out, I think, all the fantastic work that we do as a profession. So really keen to hear from colleagues on that, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much, Mark, for that. Yes, many of us probably in this room have had a career of 2 halves or more, in fact, and I think just sort of acknowledging the importance of shouting out about all the good work that is done, I think is really important. As a social worker myself for many years, it's the difficult things that reach the headlines, or the difficult things that are often talked about. And I think it's really good to know that that's a value you're holding for us as a profession too. So thank you so much. And Helen, are you okay to go next?
I am indeed. Last but by no means least, thanks, Anne-Marie. I'm Helen Phillips. I've been a founding board member of the Social Work England board. I've had a 30-year career either as a regulator or in a regulated sector. And for the last 6 years, I have exclusively done non-executive roles. So in addition to being on the board of Social Work England, I also chair the oversight regulator for professional standards in the legal sector, so solicitors, barristers, and every other sort of lawyer in England and Wales. And I chair the professional standards body for the insurance sector. So underwriters and brokers and risk professionals of all shapes and sizes. And I have the pleasure of chairing my local acute hospital trust. So much like Mark in that capacity, have the pleasure of seeing social workers day in, day out, who play a vital role every year, but particularly so over COVID and the whole way they've helped manage flows through hospital settings over that period. If I look back on my executive career, well, there's a clue there as to why I was keen to join the board of Social Work England, because I had the very great pleasure of setting up a new NDPB. I was the chief executive of Natural England. So that was a £600 million enterprise in 70 locations with 4,000 folk. And we set that organisation up 6 months prior to vesting. And we had nothing from payroll systems to strategies and anything in between. So as colleagues have said, it was delectable to get the opportunity to be part of that setup phase again, and for a specialist regulator. And to bring some of, of the experience of the good, bad and ugly in terms of what we did well or less well in doing that, and hopefully shortcutting some of that in terms of how we went about things at Social Work England. But of course, it's not just anybody that you want to be associated with, is it? And I mean, a huge part of the draw for me is the vital role that social workers play in society. It's humbling to get some insights into the sort of challenges you face. And if I've learned anything, it's that your roles are as challenging as they are rewarding. And I think the other thing I've learned is, as a new specialist regulator, we're probably trying to wear a number of hats, because we're not interested only in kind of regulating social workers. We're interested in taking regulation upstream. so that we can work hand in glove with you and making sure that those situations that are difficult or problematic can be anticipated and avoided. And I think on the board, we're all painfully aware that there's kind of no equivalent to a Royal College for social workers. And, you know, I don't think social workers should have parity of esteem with other professions, whether they're medics or nurses or whatever they are. I mean, you know, I think given the nature of your roles, really, you should be an exemplar around all of that. And I think that's the kind of challenge and opportunity that's out there for Social Work England, how it is we help bridge some of those gaps, but in a way that doesn't in any way compromise our ability to kind of discharge the regulatory function alongside all of that. But it's been a really real joy being involved, and my buddy is Julie Campbell, who's the regional lead for London, and it's been a real eye-opener and a privilege to see social work colleagues in their various practice environments, albeit virtually, over the last year or so.
Thank you so much, Helen. What an incredibly varied and interesting career you've had. I think that was a really interesting comment about the no equivalent Royal College. I'm sure that's something people will want to think about and reflect on a little bit further too. I think you are absolutely spot on. Social work is incredibly challenging, and, you know, no longer practically involved in that role, but in educating the future generations of social workers. I am incredibly humbled and respectful too of the work they do. Incredibly difficult, incredibly challenging, but also incredibly rewarding, or we wouldn't be doing it at all. So thank you so much for that. So Amina and our lovely colleagues behind the scenes are monitoring the chat. So we've had some questions sent in through the chat, and we also, as I said, opened this up some time ago for some questions to be sent in advance. So if it's all right with you, we'll go to those first, if that's okay. And I'll invite two of you to answer those questions as they come up, two each rather, to answer those questions. So the first question submitted was, what keeps you up at night when you think about Social Work England from a regulatory perspective? I don't know who'd like to answer that one, but over to you.
Shall I kick off? Is that piece? I think you know, when we look at why Social Work England was established, its fundamental role purpose is to protect the public. And I suppose what would keep me up at night is that we failed to do that. You know, we failed to deliver on our purpose. And I think, you know, that's the fundamental bit, whether our standards are wrong, whether it's putting with fitness to practice. But I do actually sleep very well, and that's because, like, we do have a fantastic team at Social Work England and a fantastic board. But I think that's ultimately the thing that will keep most regulators up at night, is some sort of regulatory failure. And we've worked hard over both from setup to launch to ensure that we understand the risks involved and mitigate those risks accordingly. And Anne, who's chair of the Audit, Risk and Assurance Committee, we will talk about that in more detail. But generally speaking, I think, and I hope the rest of the board agree with me, we sleep well at night because it's run effectively.
Thank you so much for that, Jonathan. I think
Anne-Marie, I think you've gone on mute, I'm afraid. Sorry.
So I have. I'm mute and unmuted at the same time. Thank you, Jonathan. Yes, I was just saying about the importance of acknowledging where the risks are, but also the mitigations for that too, which is close to all of our hearts in this work. I don't know if anybody would like to add to that.
I think I just agree with Jonathan, but maybe to talk about the flip side of it, because, you know, you expect the regulator to have their eye on, for instance, fitness to practice. So, you know, if we don't have a very slick process for fitness to practice where everyone feels like they've been treated as an individual and, you know, had a very empathetic and well stewarded end-to-end process, you know, that's not good. But I think for Social Work England, the prize is possibly even bigger, because we have a real glint in our eye about being able to do some of the stuff that's beyond regulation. You know, being able to talk about, you you know, what are the risks in different practice environments, or, you know, what is good practice, or, you know, what do we observe as opportunities in the sector? And of course, you lose your ability to be influential in that space if you're seen to be just kind of distracted or overly kind of busy with the kind of what I'd call the bread and butter role of regulation. So, you know, I agree with everything that Jonathan says, but I think there's the kind of the additional risk of the opportunity cost of not being on top of all of that.
May I build on that, Anne-Marie? May I just add a point? I think one of the things that keeps us awake at night, or should be keeping us awake at night, is the long-term future of the profession. And we've been very focused in the first couple of years, as colleagues have said, on getting set up, on gaining the trust of the profession, and in particular in fitness to practice, on processing the cases fairly and as quickly as possible, you know, so taking on board criticism of the past. But all that, I suppose, are table stakes, and it gives us table stakes. But what we want to be in the business of is working closely with the profession about its long-term sustainability in its future, to make it a tremendously attractive profession for people to join and to stay in, and to make it a very rewarding and fulfilling career. And I think a respected regulator is an important part of that journey, because it creates the dignity that the profession is due, and the regard that people will give it from the public. So I think it's something that, as we come out of the initial stages, because it still feels like we're still in the initial stages of processing what we've inherited, and of course coping with incredible pressures along with the profession during the pandemic. But as we come out of that, I think that would be an incredibly meaningful dialogue for us to have together.
That's a really excellent point, Mark. And I was just thinking about, you know, actually we're in the middle of a pandemic, and as a profession we're thinking, what does this mean? There's the immediate crisis that we're living, but long term we have to think beyond that. Certainly as an academic, that's where my head is a lot of the time. And I think the idea of the long-term future of the profession having the dignity and respect that it so deserves is incredibly close to all of our hearts. And I'm really glad to hear you say that. That feels really important for us as a profession too. Thank you so much. I don't know if we want to go on to the next question, if that's all right with everybody. And of course, Helen, if you've other points to make later, please do come in too. So the second question that we've had sent in is, what's the benefit of social work being regulated?
Shall I start on that one, and then the others can join in? I don't think it's about regulation per se. The big benefit to my mind, and bear in mind, you know, I probably know least about social workers than anybody else, is recognising social work as a profession in its own right, and not one of a number of other healthcare professionals regulated by the same organisation. I think that focus just on social workers is a real kind of step change. And that enables Social Work England, as the new regulator, to do things like ensure the right standards are in place, ensure that the education meets those standards, to make sure that it's kind of building on what Mark was just saying, that the experience that, you know, people who are training to be social workers have is as consistent as it possibly can be, that they get all the opportunities post-qualification of, you know, the ASYE and or continuous professional development. It just gives us all those opportunities to make sure that people have got the best options available to them to further and progress their career.
Thank you so much for that. And I don't know if anybody else wants to add to that. A profession in our own right, regulated by a specialist regulator, is important for us too. Thank you. Any other thoughts on that?
Just to add, perhaps an obvious point, that it's important for the public to know that, you know, when they interact with a social worker, that social worker, as Anne says, is part of a recognised profession, that is regulated. and that somebody is a registered social worker. I think, you know, in the same way as if you're dealing with a doctor or a nurse, you'd want to know that the individual is a recognized profession, and that is governed, that is regulated. So I think that is very important for members of the public to know that, you know, this is a profession for which you have to study at, and you have to learn at, and you have to train in, and I think that gives huge credence to the whole profession, and should continue to do so. I think the corollary to that is that we therefore, as a regulator, need always to be fair, and to have incredibly high standards that we maintain throughout with the profession. I think that's the other side of the equation here.
Just to build on what Mark said and Anna said, regulation is only used when it's absolutely necessary, and it's important to reflect on the fact that social workers play a really important part in society, and that's the reason why they're regulated. The impact of a bad social worker is much worse than the impact of a bad engineer. You know, it really can have a deep, lasting impact on people's lives, and that's the reason you know, social work has been regulated. And I think the opportunity here is to do something more than other regulators do. You know, these sort of events that we're doing, Social Work Week, is an opportunity to have a benefit of being regulated that perhaps other regulated populations don't experience. So we are trying to be a different sort of regulator, as Helen says, offer support to allow the profession to be the best it can in the absence of perhaps a Royal College or something similar.
I also think good regulation builds brand, and I think the brand of social work is a really important, it's an important concept and construct, isn't it? And I'm a great believer that the kind of ultimate public protection is the esteem that the profession holds itself in, and its desire to maintain its brand and its position amongst the professions. Because, you know, a regulator, even when they get upstream and they become anticipative, you know, it's usually after the event interaction. But I think high quality, good regulation is part of a number of actions that build the brand of the profession. And, you know, we talk a lot about wanting to do things in a really sensitive, sensible, bespoke way for social workers. And I think that's, you know, back to the question of, you know, why you regulate it. Well, you know, I think that's part of the benefit of being regulated and well regulated, we hope.
Absolutely. Thanks all of you so much for that. I think there's beyond the role of the regulator is definitely what this Social Work Week is all about. So I'm delighted to hear you say that as well. Thank you. So, and the next question is, what is your best hope for the social work profession?
I wouldn't mind building on something Mark said earlier. And I think it will be a sign of success if there was a great demand for social workplaces, if it was a coveted profession to join, if there was a real understanding of what social workers do, if there was a sense of public thanks and community esteem and acknowledgement about the contribution that's being made, particularly to the most vulnerable in society. If people, when they joined, stayed, if there was the opportunity to make sure that not only did we have good inclusion and diversity at the entry points, but at every point through the kind of progression through the profession, that, you know, that those whole principles of inclusiveness were being lived. I think that'd all be good things.
Can I add, Anne-Marie, that there's I attended an event with Joanna last week, and it was ASYE students who just finished their ASYE, and so they were raring to go to get into their new professional capacity. And we shared a statistic with them that happens to be in the publication that Social Work England set out recently. And it was something like 27 or 29% of social workers didn't feel that their profession was valued. And yet 88% of the public thought that social work professionals were really valuable to society. And to build on what Helen said, wouldn't it be great if we flipped that the other way, and that social workers actually believed that, you know, they are a really, really valuable asset to the society in this country?
Definitely, Anne. I was just pausing because I think Jonathan's going to come in. So, Jonathan.
I was just going to echo the comments made by Helen and Anne to a degree. You know, I think social work hasn't had the opportunity to grow and develop in the way that other professions perhaps have. And what my hope is that it continues to grow in that way and cohesively, and it's that it's a profession that people really look forward to taking on. When I went to one of the universities recently with Philip, my regional engagement lead, it was interesting that I think only half the students wanted to go into being a registered social worker. The others were going off into other parts, and that struck me as odd. Actually, most people will go into university to go and study something, have the dream of becoming, you know, registering for that field of work. So I would like to see in 3 or 4 years' time, when I go back to that university, 70%, 80% wanting to go into registered social work. And that would be, you know, I think that's what my hope is for the future, that it becomes a profession that people want to join, feel valued to be part of, and are trusted by the public.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Mark, I don't know if you want to come in on that. If you have any thoughts?
I think colleagues have said it all, but I'm wondering, and I suppose I'll pose the question to our professional colleagues here on the call: do we want to set our ambition even higher? That we should be world class when it comes to social work, and have a world class environment and model, and lead. And I've been looking at models in other countries, and actually there's a lot to admire. In terms of what we've done in the UK, the way we set up the regulation, the way we set up the educational streams, the way the esteem in which social workers are being held. So I think there's a lot to be proud of, and I want us to aim even higher, to be even more proud of that, and perhaps work with other countries as well to see what we can learn from each other.
That's incredible, Mark. Such a good point. I think all of you have touched on a lot of the same things, that sense of being proud of our profession. I love the idea of actually thinking beyond England, the UK, Europe, but worldwide. Social work is practiced so very differently around the world, and it's important to value the different models internationally as well too. That leads us in sort of nicely in one sense to the next question, which has been sent through by somebody working as a social worker within an NHS capacity. And this person says, as a registered social worker employed in an NHS role, I'm aware of how our profession is not perhaps as recognised or as respected as others, both in NHS and wider professions. How can social work be different to previous regulatory bodies, especially as other bodies are predominantly led by professionals from that role, in increasing our recognition today? A fantastic question. I don't know if you'd like to pick up on that.
I wouldn't mind picking up on the second bit of it, and I might leave the first bit of it to other colleagues, because the second bit of it also links into some of the chat going on about, you know, surely regulation's better when we're doing it for ourselves. And of course, as the oversight regulator for lawyers, I'd have to disagree, because lawyers wanted to do it for themselves for a very long time, and it wasn't a very winning formula. And, you know, without wishing to be indiscreet or indelicate, when the segregation of the representative functions of the profession from the regulatory functions of the profession were first mooted, you know, there was scenarios of doom, gloom and implosion going around the place. But, you know, the past 10 years have shown us how the separation out of the regulatory functions from the representative functions have strengthened the brand of the profession, because public trust and confidence is improved when people know that that regulation is independent. So, you know, I think that's an interesting reference point, you know, 10 years on in terms of the experience of having separated that out, as to it having done what was desired in terms of public trust and confidence.
I think that probably links to a few comments that have been made in the chat. Is it worth just picking that up now? And I think you know, the board is very conscious of the comments that have been made, and you have considered them. And the first thing to say is that in terms of appointments to the board and the executive aren't responsible for those. They're independent appointments, public appointments that are made by the Secretary of State. So we just recognising those comments. You know, we do recognise the comments that have been made and positions are made, but it is up to the Secretary of State to make those appointments rather than the Social Working England board, the executive. And I think it's also worth thinking about what the role is for a regulator and the role is of a board as well. So a regulator is there to protect the public, and that's different to a Royal College or a professional body. And as Helen says, it's important that that's led independently, and it's not seen to be sort of social workers regulating social workers. And there's a variety of different reasons for that, and that is the way that regulators are going. I suspect that the healthcare regulators will go that way in the future to demonstrate that you know, social workers aren't regulating social workers, and that there's a public interest point there, with the majority being sort of lay or public appointments. I think the other point is to think about what the role of the board is, and that's to oversee the work of the executive team and to set the strategy. And that requires a really diverse set of skills. So my background is in assessment regulators. Helen's got an excellent CV across a variety of different fields. Mark's a guru with technology and can do all the numbers. You know, it's a really impressive board with a really good mix of skills and experience in which to set the strategy for the organisation, but also to ensure that it's going on the straight and narrow. And I think, you know, that requires a different set of skills necessary to the profession that you're regulating. We do have social workers on the board. Both the chair, I think, and the chief executive have a social work background, which is unusual in a sort of regulatory setting. But we've also built in structures to get feedback from registrants and from the profession. And I think what we try to do at Social Work England is look towards co-creation, collaboration, advisory forums, and these are the ways in which social workers can get involved in Social Work England. It's a slightly different role that the board has to inputting into standards development and the future of the profession. Really, we're there as sort of custodians of the organisation itself. So I hope that's sort of slightly helpful, and it probably answers partly the second question and just builds on what Helen said.
Definitely, that's incredibly important to acknowledge, isn't it? The role of the board in holding the chief executive and the executive team to account, requiring all the different and varied expertise that you have outlined, I think, in your introductions. Very much. Thank you. I don't know if anybody else has any other comments on that.
Anne-Marie, I'm just going to interrupt. Can anybody who's not on the board or not speaking just switch their cameras off? I'm just conscious there are people with cameras on who are not speaking. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Amina, for that. Okay, so I'm going to go to another question that's been sent in advance, if that's okay. And I think some of you have touched on this as you talked about what you've learnt. We know you've each spent some time shadowing the regional engagement leads and have met a number of social workers across the country. I think each of you are paired up with a regional engagement lead, is that right? So that must be incredibly helpful, but also very interesting. I don't know if each of you would like to tell us what your experiences have been, perhaps other things to the things you've mentioned earlier.
I'll start again, Anne-Marie, if you like. So that the ASYE event I attended the other day, I was really struck by how enthusiastic everybody was. They were absolutely champing at the bit to get into their profession properly, as it were, you know, after the ASYE. And it just, it was really, it's a word Helen used earlier, it's really quite humbling, you know, as a non-social worker, to hear these people, and there was a range of ages. It wasn't all just people who were new graduates, you know, it was sort of young graduates. It was a range of different people with different backgrounds, different experiences, but so enthusiastic about the role and so keen to explore all the opportunities that were potentially available to them. So we did have a bit of a session on continuous professional development, and we talked through that a bit. And, you know, it was just the hunger almost to learn more, you know, having done a university degree and then done this year in supported employment, and still hungry to learn more. You know, it's just, it really is quite humbling to hear.
Thank you so much, Anne. I don't know who's going next. Jonathan, I think.
I think, Helen, you were about to come in, weren't you?
After you.
Thank you. I think, I mean, one of the things that from my experience is actually the optimism around social work in England, and that's been really, really heartening. I think people do see that social work in England is going to be a different regulator to what's come before. Just going to some of the comments, that we're trying to do things differently, that we're trying to engage effectively, we're trying to work together and develop the profession together. And I think that experience has sort of been recognised across all of the sort of engagement I've had with social workers through Philip and my regional engagement lead. I think the other thing that I was really impressed was by students. Again, I was from the universities, really probing questions. I got completely grilled, but those that wanted to go into social work, and again going back to the sort of half and half point, were absolutely passionate and often had an experience of it themselves. Which is really interesting. I think that's come through a few times when I've had engagement with social workers, that they've been impacted by social work themselves and they want to make a difference, and that's such a unique thing to have. And I think you know, they've been really impressed by everyone I've met.
Thank you, Jonathan. Helen's apologies. I think you're going to come in.
Not at all. I was just going to reflect on the session I attended where the Borough of Enfield held their annual conference virtually, and Julie and I were invited along for part of it, and I so enjoyed it. I kind of came off thinking, wonder why I never thought I might be a social worker, because there was a very consistent tone to that meeting. I was very struck by the tone, and given my various roles, I spend a lot of time with doctors. And doctors have, you know, it doesn't matter whether you're an oncologist or, you know, orthopedic man or whatever you are, you know, there's something sufficiently similar about people in the various branches of the profession that you can kind of relate to them. And out of that session, the kind of strands of commonality, irrespective of who was speaking or what particular areas of practice they were in, there was something extraordinarily courteous and kind and inclusive about how colleagues were treating each other and how they were talking about their work and their clients. And I thought to myself, you know, we sit at our board meetings and talk about things like standards. You know, and of course you can set out, well, you'll be professional, and being professional means all of this. And I thought, you know, coming away from that Enfield session, if we could capture some of the kind of finer detail of this way of working, that will be the essence and core of what it means to be a professional. And at the moment, in the world of lawyers, we're trying to move away from just having a focus on continuous professional development and thinking whether or not lawyers should have to have tests of ongoing competence in much the same way as, for example, a doctor has to revalidate every so many years. And we're increasingly coming to the view, without prejudice to concluding the consultation on the matter, that the essence of that is going to be around things like reflective practice and feedback from patients or service users. So that all goes to the essence for me of professionalism, rather than the attributes about knowledge and skills and acquired experience. And I think that's the thing that sets a very high benchmark and for social workers and sets them apart. And I think the more we as a regulator can work with the grain of something very precious you have as a profession, the better the job will do.
Helen, that's wonderful to hear you talk about other professions learning something from us. We often hear the other way round, and I think you're right about that sort of respect and compassion, and those sort of values are central to us, and we're very happy to share our learning on that. Thank you. Mark?
Yes, I think to perhaps build on that point, Anne-Marie, there that Helen had triggered off there. I think we often forget how innovative we are in this space, and just setting up regional engagement leads. I mean, I work a lot in my other roles with the healthcare regulators. That's just not something that's done, and that's something that's very special. Echo colleagues' comments. It's been such a pleasure engaging. I've got the Northwest, and it's been such a pleasure engaging and listening and actually being able to help. And I think that's kind of where we are right now in the relationship, because we're still kind of in, we've just been through the first year. CPD was top of people's minds. And so a lot of that was making sure that the profession had a very direct route into the regulator. And for us to address any concerns at all, any anxieties. But I think if we look to the future, we can cement that relationship. There are a lot more sophisticated things we could do together through the regions. There are massive regional variations when it comes to pressures, opportunities, the experience of the profession. And I think through that, we can start to get some intelligence. And as a regulator, we're probably the only body who can see things nationally. And then I think we'll have a role to support the profession in building itself, in addressing its own pressures, in attracting more to the profession, and in designing education, training, or indeed perhaps innovating on CPD in a way that suits the profession better, but sensitive to different regional needs. Because Helen talked about the Borough of Enfield there in London, which I know very well. That's completely different to the Yorkshire Dales, right, in terms of its needs, and we need to recognise that. And that's where I think the regional engagement leads, once the relationship builds, I think we'll be up and open for a discussion as to how we want to use those as platforms.
That's such an excellent point, Mark. I think the relationships with regional engagement leads in the sector are so important, and there's obviously been opportunities this week for people to network within their own regions, and certainly ours have been incredibly supportive and helpful for us in the West Midlands over the time I've been involved with Social Work England too. So we've had another question come in by the chat, and I'm aware there's somebody got their hand up, so I'll take the question in the chat, then we'll go to the question in the hand, and then I'm going to with the hand up, and then I'll hand back to Amina. So just really probably one person answering this maybe, or very quick summary. What plans would the board have to make social work feel valued as a profession? Very quickly, 1 or 2 words. Not an easy question, sorry.
I think by regulating effectively, we should hopefully build trust and confidence in the profession. By building trust and confidence in ourselves as a regulator, we'll build trust and confidence in the profession, and that should help it feel valued. I know one of the things that we do measure is public perception of the profession, and I think that links to value. And it goes back to a comment that Helen said earlier, in that actually, I once walked into a room, and the chief executive of the organisation I worked for said, "Here's Jonathan. He keeps the badge shiny." And by that, I meant keep the brand shiny, keep the social. And similarly, by regulating social work, we should keep social workers shiny, and that should drive value. And I think that's what my long-term game. When I first started looking at this a long time ago, when I was on the advisory board, was that we wanted a profession and a regulator that was trusted, had confidence, and was respected. And I think that's how we drive value.
Absolutely, what a fantastic answer, Jonathan. Effective regulator, so important. I also like the shiny bit as well. So somebody has their hand up in the chat, so I think there might be one or more persons. So the first person to put their hand up, are you okay to put your microphone on, unmute yourself and then pose your question to the board.
Yes, my name is Malebu, and thank you very much for the opportunity. And I apologize if this question has already been, asked because I had to take the call. My first question, I've got two. My first question is, social work field is very diverse and well represented, and I do not see that reflected on the board. And I'm just wondering whether, is it, are you able to tell me what steps that you are taking? Because how it looks, it appears that, it's quite, exclusive, and probably that's not the case. So I was just wondering if there are steps that you will let us know, because the cohort of the students that I've seen is really quite diverse as well. And I suppose they will also need to see that. That's my first question. My second one is, in the years that I've been social worker, we first started having a general social care council, and then we had the healthcare professional, and then now we have the Social Work England. Are we going to have another body in 4 years or 3 years that also requesting that with their own criteria, when we're trying to get used to the ones that we're working with, then there is another one coming? So those are my two questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So maybe one quick answer for each of those points about diversity and representation on the boards, and regulator role. I don't know who'd like to answer one.
I'd like to jump in quickly, and Mark, I think we slightly answered the board role a little bit earlier, but it is a public appointment, so it's not made by the board or by the executive team. So just to answer another question that came in the chat just now about how social workers can get involved and how future social workers can get involved, we do have a national advisory forum, which has a mixture of social workers and those with lived experience who sit and provide advice, guidance, and act as an advisory board to us. We also, and I hope everyone in the school has been involved in some extent, consult a great deal with the profession when we make changes to our standards, to our rules. You may remember when we were first setting up, we hosted sort of round tables all across the country, which are really well attended, and I attended a few of those. We also work with the regional engagement leads. That's another opportunity to feedback. So we're trying to build a regulator that has lots and lots of touch points with you that you can feedback and get involved.
Thanks, Jonathan. Very quickly, Mark.
May I address the diversity point? I think as a board, if I look around the board right now, myself included, I think we probably reflect the general population in terms of its gender balance, its ethnic makeup. But I agree with Malebu, we can do more, and we ought to do more, and in particular start to reflect the profession that we are regulating. And I think one of our biggest roles in this, and as Jonathan was saying, the appointment is made by government, but government's also highly sensitive to diverse appointments. It has to be stressed. That is a key part of all appointments. But I think the role we can play as a board and as board members is to help coach, mentor the next generation of leaders, because there will come a time when our terms on the board will end, and it will be time to move on, and time for fresh people to come onto the board. And I'm hoping then there is another generation, a far more diverse makeup and composition will come into the board and take over from us. And I think if there's going to be one legacy we as board members should pledge, it should be that.
Thank you so much. I think your second point about the regulator, Colm answered in the session this morning with Colm and Kamlesh, so it might be good to go back and listen to that again. He did talk about third regulator in 6 years, so it'd be good to pick up on that. I am so sorry, but that is all we have time for today. Thank you so much to Jonathan and Helen and Mark for giving up your time with us today, and for everybody who's participated in the session. I've really enjoyed this, some wonderful, insightful, thoughtful answers that cause us to think and reflect about the future of our profession. Thank you so much. I'm going to hand back to Amina now to close the session.
Thank you, Anne-Marie, and thank you to all our board members. Absolutely echo what Anne-Marie said. It's been a really interesting session. Thank you again for your time. Just a reminder to everybody that this session has been recorded, so it will be available via our YouTube channel shortly after Social Work Week. We hope that you've enjoyed today's session, and we'd appreciate it if you can take some time to complete a brief survey that we've added to the chat, and we welcome any thoughts or feedback that you may have. You can share that with us via our post-event survey or by emailing socialworkweek@socialworkengland.org.uk. Julie's also mentioned in the chat that if you are a social worker reflecting on this session, you can use this as part of your CPD. So if there are some reflections that you've had throughout today's session, please do use them. And we thank you again for joining us, and please do share your thoughts via social media and use the hashtag Social Work Week 2021. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy the rest of the week, and we hope you have a great evening. Bye.